working. I think that is it. This is not going to be as good as in person, and it's not supposed to be because it's designed for in person, right? So, my coffee. I have to have my coffee. Oh, now I'm in a bad mood. Sorry. Anyway,
Get this man.
Oh, there. That's it back there. Start back here, if you don't mind. Yeah. Writing, I believe, should be understood religiously as an outward sign of an inner reality, and an outward reality, which is God's grace on the cross, right? So sometimes there's writing with thinking going on, and sometimes there's not. It's just going through the motions, right? Writing can be a torture, and writing can be a joy. It's a tool to help us think better, and sometimes an overemphasis on the artistry of it can get in the way of good thinking. So it's a very interesting balance that we need to be able to walk in our writing curriculum. We have to look at writing not just as a bunch of atomic facts in a different grade, a different set of independent autonomous skills, but it's a course of study over the whole life of the child while they're with us, cooperating with you to help shape them to be an effective instrument in God's kingdom. That's what we do. So the progymnasmata are part of our curriculum, and they are a bunch of exercises that were designed in Greek antiquity to shape the children towards being effective citizens, because the point, the end of it, is a thesis, which we'll be doing next Tuesday with the seniors here, right? So we do this in our curriculum. We are working towards a senior thesis, and we take these exercises and we distribute them throughout the curriculum, all the way down to first grade and second grade, where they start with fables, which every child loves. And I've grown, as C.S. Lewis encourages us all to come to love them later in life, after you realize that you didn't need to despise them in order to be mature, right? So we do all of this in our writing curriculum. We weave together many different strands: scientific rhetoric, historical rhetoric. I'm working with the science and math teachers to talk about all that, because we have to do technical writing as well as persuasive writing, literature, fictive writing, poetry, all these different kinds of writing. So what you're going to see now is the progress of the child from the beginning parts, where writing is focused mainly on the actual manual dexterity skills, being able to sit still in a chair, wiggle on it, or able to hold a pencil correctly, and actually align things up and keep between the lines and all of that kind of thing. That's writing, just like adding. And you can make sense of all the scribbles on a page, but that doesn't mean you understand anything. We're really good at teaching people to read who don't understand a single thing that they read, right? That's why he wrote his book on how to read. So our writing program is designed to take them from learning how to actually physically, you'll see in these wonderful beginning pictures with Ms. Sorensen, teaching them the physicality of writing, staying in the lines, all that kind of wonderful cursive formative stuff that forms an attention to detail and artistic excellence and beauty that is missing in our mechanistic age, where you just type it, right? So it begins there, and it proceeds all the way through the different exercises that they'll be talking about all night to the senior thesis, so that the graduates can go out and be effective instruments in the kingdom of God, because they're able to think clearly, communicate well, and be good agents of God's reconciliation that he accomplished in Christ by focusing on truth, goodness, and beauty in the midst of evil, ugly error that is around us. So with that, I would begin with this one.
Thank you. Good evening. I will set that way. Okay. So, how do we begin to teach writing? How does a child begin the process of writing? And why do we teach writing at our lowest grades? Starting in our lower grammar classrooms, you will find children holding pencils and beginning the learning process of the generational gift of writing. God has given us His Word in written form, and we are here to continue to point the students back to His creation. Here in our classrooms, you will find that we find it worth passing this generational gift of writing down to our students. They are the future of our world. God gave us 44 authors that were filled with the Holy Spirit, which formed our Holy Scriptures. Our aim in the classroom is to raise students that can gracefully put words to a page in a way that would honor their Lord and Savior. In all grades, we look for truth, beauty, and goodness in all areas that we spend our time on. I believe you will see truth, beauty, and goodness in all of the writings displayed tonight. Let's start with pre-kindergarten or pre-K. In pre-K, students enter without much understanding of what school is or what writing is, but will leave the classroom with an understanding of how to be in a classroom and interact with their peers and their teachers. These are huge moments, and they're wonderful. Another large learning moment that takes place in the classroom is learning how to hold a pencil and to write letters. The students learn the phonetic sounds, how to write each letter in the alphabet. Sorry, I left my water over there. And they work on learning their numbers. They also learn to write their names by the end of the year. And they touch on 2- and 3-letter tracing words. Let's look at some examples. So the first one, they're a little left or right, you know? Okay, so they're a little hard to see, sorry. These are 2 examples. You can see the children working on individual sounds, letter names, and writing 1 letter at a time. This age is exciting as they are writing with a pencil, but also physically building letters with Play-Doh and understanding how to be in a classroom as a young student. We are building skills slowly, 1 thing at a time. Moving on to kindergarten. Kindergarten is the typical age children will enter into a formal schooling, and where writing truly starts to be formed for most. You might be able to remember back to your younger years. Do you remember your teacher that taught you to hold a pencil correctly, or the first person that taught you to write your name? These are huge moments in a child's writing career. If the child was in our pre-K classroom, they will receive a review from the previous year and then continue to move on from there. Remember, we are building skills slowly and allowing the child to grow in their understanding. In kindergarten, children get to try out their first real experiences of holding a pencil, putting their hand on paper, and creating their first writings. These writings are in the form of single letters at first, but once they know all their letters, they can copy their teacher's words off the board. We believe students learn best when learning directly from a teacher. Students love being able to copy and learn new words, but also how to write them in cursive. Then they start reading. After they've been reading for about 9 weeks, they talk about writing a sentence. What is a sentence? Can you think of how to explain a complete thought to a child? Well, this is a continuing lesson for years in the making. As the kindergarten teacher would say, it's a pretty rusty situation, but beautiful at the same time. It's such a beautiful thing, watching the children take that first step. Remember that we are teaching small quality steps of writing at a time while also reading quality literature. The children are introduced to a large amount of literature, some of which might be familiar to them, while a great deal of it is new to them. We look back to the classics and well-loved timeless stories. We are not only helping the children write daily, but we are introducing stories to the children that are beautiful and point us back to truth, beauty, and goodness. Let's look at these kindergartens. Sorry that they're hard to see. I have the examples in my bag if you'd like to look at them. Can you see the growth and the beauty of it? Students in first grade will begin by repeating what they've learned in kindergarten, copying from their teacher, learning and relearning how to form a complete sentence. After writing sentences for at least half of the year, they will form their first paragraph. They start the discussion of what is a paragraph, forming from one main idea or thought. The students build these paragraphs by copying their teachers until they have a firm understanding of what it is to form a basic 2-point paragraph. By the end of first grade, students are able to write a 2-point paragraph using the outline by themselves. They also write out answers for their comprehension pages. Once they've finished reading a book in class, they will work on answering questions on these sheets. I'm going to show you. This is the example.
Is that first grade?
This is first grade. Once they finished reading a book in class, they will work on answering these questions. As you can see, this is a teacher-led conversation where the student and teacher discuss how to form a complete sentence and what makes it so. This is also a great opportunity for the teacher to continue to teach the concepts of when to capitalize and when to add an end mark to a sentence or phrase. These pages are not typically perfect as the students are still learning these basic concepts. But isn't it wonderful to see 6- and 7-year-olds be able to write so beautifully? In first grade, they also start listening to chapter books like the series of Narnia, which are read aloud to them by their teachers. They start to understand different types of writing in the very basic form, and their love for learning continues to grow deeply. Moving to the end of what we in classical education call the polyparrot stage of learning, we enter into second grade. What I've said about the previous grades, I could say about second grade. We are teaching small quality steps of writing at a time, while also reading quality literature. Second graders are able to read on their own. They are fascinated with stories and love listening to and reading them. Their vocabulary has grown alongside all their other skills of being a student. Writing is no different. At the beginning of the year, students walk into their classrooms to find several new opportunities to continue to work on their skill of writing. Students will first be reminded of what they've already learned in the previous grades. All year long, the children will work on a commonplace book. This book is filled with truth, beauty, and goodness. It contains all of the children's credos for that year. They receive a copy of their credo, and then they write it out in their best handwriting. As the year goes on, children can look back to see where they have come from and how their handwriting and writing has been refined. In this book, they will also have classical fables. In second grade, students are taught fables. We read them aloud, discuss the different language, vocabulary, act them out, sometimes change words to see how it changes the story, and finally we draw the story. Fable time has become one of the students' most loved and looking forward to times of the year. Classroom. In all of our reading, if I was to ask my second graders a question like, what watched Pa and the wagon go past the creek bottoms, even if they do not know the answer, They will know how to start start to form the classical sentence that will become their answer. Sorry. I'm missing a slide. Okay, well, it's very similar to this, but it's not that one. In my example, I have it in my bag, you can come and look at it. The student wrote, "Deer watched Paw and the wagon go past the creek bottoms." He didn't simply state "Deer watched." He proceeded to state all of the details that were in the question back again in the answer. This is called a classical sentence. We also continue to work on 2-point paragraphs while moving toward 3-point paragraphs. They will write one at the beginning of the year with their teacher to be reminded of what they had already been taught in first grade. And then they are given a chance to truly write their own first paragraphs. These paragraphs are typically on the subject they understand best themselves. What are their favorite colors? What are their favorite animals? What are their favorite holidays? And so on. This example is the outline of a 3-point paragraph. Looking at this example, you will see that the student wrote about how they can make a difference and allow Christ's light to shine in their lives. Again, we are looking back to truth, beauty, and goodness. That's her outline. And then that was her final draft. As these children move forward in the grades, they will continue to grow in this generational gift of writing. Benjamin Franklin is quoted in saying, "Either write something worth reading or do something worth writing." I believe these students.
That's it. Now we know why our students write so well. Once they get into 3rd grade, it's like, wow, they write so well. Okay. Thank you for coming tonight. We love teaching your children, and we love teaching them how to write well. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's so worthwhile, as Alina was mentioning. Learning to write well is important because it helps us to think better, to read better, and to express ourselves more clearly and in an orderly fashion. Over the course of a whole year, our students in the grammar grades are learning how to discuss and write from textbook readings in history and science, their historical fiction and biographies, and essays from the reading books that they've read, and other types of writing. A particularly important thing that we try to help them to discover are the biblical truths, whether it's in history or science or in the books that they read. Starting with 3rd grade. Okay. 3rd grade children read 6 books a year with discussion questions to guide children into pulling out the storyline, analyzing the character, the moral traits of those characters, including any biblical truths that they can be writing about. Here's a sample of the 3rd grade discussion questions from Sarah Plain et al. And again, the classical style responses in the bottom half. And let's see. This is a writing assignment in 3rd grade as well. This is one of the writing assignments that we began last year, that all the grades are writing either fables or narratives or looking at quotes and sayings. And this one is a slide of work that a student has identified in the narrative is identified what we call the 9 components of narrative invention, and that is the who, what, when, where, how, and why of the narrative. The truth he recognizes in the story, and analyzes how the story moves and changes. The children will often retell the story in their own words before the writing process, and which they really love to do. They can be pretty silly. The next slide is from the same assignment. The same student, showing that once they've read the story and they've looked at the different components in the story, they create an outline from the story. And then on the right-hand side, they rewrite the story from their own outline. So it's really good practice for outline work and retelling the story. Other writing that 3rd grade does is using pocketbooks to answer history questions. They practice rewriting short stories in their own words using synonyms that they've searched for in dictionaries and thesauruses. And moving on to 4th grade. So this is a sample of a history assignment in 4th grade. This student has learned about the Emancipation Proclamation, and he's explaining it in his own words. He starts right out explaining what it is, how it affects the families, and the issues between the two sides that are relative to the proclamation. The sentences flow very smoothly. It's very easy to read. It's enjoyable to read because of how the sentences flow one to another, and it makes sense the way the student has written it. Very clear to read and understand. And again, that beauty. I remember seeing this student's catapult. He was pretty excited about it, and I said, "Well, how many marshmallows did you get to eat?" I don't remember if he said 1 or 2 or none, but anyway, it was very exciting. They were all so excited about it. What I like about this format is that there's very nice sentence structure explaining his method, the outcome of his project, and then insight of the project. So, and again, the beautiful cursive, very well written sentences, and the way the students are able to express themselves so clearly in a logical, fluid manner is really astounding. I don't think I was able to do that until I was in college. So in 4th grade, the students read 4 books throughout the year. Here's a sample of discussion questions from The Perilous Road. In classical style again, and restating the question and the answer. Another assignment that I accidentally dropped off the slide is similar to the 3rd grade writing and what you will see in the 6th grade writing when I get to that point. The 4th graders analyze quotes and there's a variety of quotes they can choose from. The quote that they analyzed was about how all honest work is valuable in the sight of God. The students explained the different components of the writing. They wrote a rough draft. They analyzed the quote and wrote their own story that exhibited the value of that quote, that at the same time urges others to follow the wisdom that they found in the quote. 4th grade also has frequent short writing assignments from the Bible. And Ms. Holcomb began listing all the different things that they write about. And it would take me another 10 or 15 minutes to tell you about all those things. She's really a wonderful teacher in the way she teaches writing. Let's see if there's something else here. I think that's it for 4th grade. So fifth grade, Pam will sort of discuss that.
So in fifth grade, the students are still practicing the skills that they've been developing over the years. And one thing that's kind of distinctive, a step up, is that in their reading class, the teacher will work with the students to write notes. And then from their notes, students have to write chapter summaries for their books, which is a very difficult task. And then what I have listed here is a recent essay from one of our students. Students finished a book, Adam of the Road, and the students were given a virtue, or actually the idea of virtue, and they were asked to give evidence in the text of where virtue shows up and how is it shown by the character. And so, so just an example from here, this shows many times in the book, but mainly when Adam is on his journey, even when things got difficult, he didn't give up his search for his father, Roger the minstrel. And so they're given the big idea, the theme, and then they are to use their notes to write about that and then give evidence from the text. Oh, it's really blurry. This is another example of the same essay. So students saying Adam never freeloaded. He always stuck to his father's principles and always had good manners. He always stayed calm and showed whatever he showed after that. But you can see that students are giving examples from the text, and then they're having to write multiple paragraphs to defend that. And I'll hand it back to you.
For the sixth grade year, I am really focused on getting the kids ready for what they'll be doing in seventh grade. And that drives me through the whole year to keep pushing them for that, because seventh grade is a little bit of a step up, more so than what they're used to. And so they continue to learn how to really delve into their textbooks. And I want them to think about researching. So they are given the worksheets for each chapter, and I want them to research to find the answers. The research can be really challenging because as you move through the grades, the answers don't just jump right out and plant themselves on their paper, which they still sometimes think that's supposed to happen, with them just sitting there. And so sometimes the answer is on this page, a little on that page, a little on that page. So I'm getting them ready for the more advanced researching, looking for the answers in their textbooks. So this is an example of a science assignment. Most of the answers will be written in classical style. I throw in some simple phrases for answers just to kind of break up, because that's hard work. It's really hard work writing in classical style. They really have to form their thoughts first and get the idea of what they want to say before they even get started. And some of them still do in sixth grade. They get started with what they learned in second grade, get that classical part out first, you're restating the question. And so it's really interesting, for I will have students that will still be doing that. And then they'll get stuck and they'll say, okay, I'm not sure what to do next. So I have to kind of guide them through that. But they have that down. They really have that down. If they have Mrs. Sorensen, they know that. So that's really fun. The other thing I'm doing for the science and the history worksheets, here's a history worksheet, is I'm making the questions usually a two-part, so that they start paying more close attention to the question and not just assume they've got oh, there's that part, I got the answer here. And frequently, they forget the second part or the third part. So I'm training them this year, you have to pay attention to the questions. Make sure you know what is expected of you. So oftentimes they'll have to go back and make those corrections. In 6th grade, in any of our writing assignments, they can go back and make corrections and I will bump up their grade a little bit because I believe that that's really how they learn best, when they have to go back and make those writing corrections. So on the next slide, so this is one page of a 2-page worksheet on the discussion questions from A Father's Promise. And these can be really difficult too, because when they're going through a chapter book, I make sure that the questions are written in such a way that they have to be researching their textbook as well. They have to be reading. There is a tendency sometimes, if students get a little behind in other subjects or in reading, that they try to hunt and peck for the answers, and you literally cannot do that. It is obvious that you haven't read the book, and I'm trying to train them. You have to do the reading. You can't just go back and look for the answers and assume that you're going to be okay with that. I do have 1 or 2 books that I don't have prepared discussion questions, so then they do their chapter summaries. This is actually harder for them than just answering questions that I've already prepared, because now they have to pull out the essence of each chapter. And that I have found that that's really challenging for some of them. Okay, so the students in 6th grade begin learning how to use an outline. I have formed outlines for them. I don't make them do their own outline without a format of some kind. So I sometimes have biographical outlines, sometimes narrative outlines. This is an outline from the book Johnny Tremaine. The outlines are a great tool for the students to be able to organize their thoughts chronologically or topically, depending on the type of writing assignment. Throughout the year, I see a marked improvement in their writing because they are getting so much more efficient using an outline and making it really work for them. At the beginning of the year, the outline is here and then their writing is here, and sometimes there's not a great connection between the two. So it's really fun to see how better they get as the year goes on. From the outline, the students create well-crafted sentences. Here's a couple of pages from the rough draft from that same outline. And on this page, it's hard to tell, but there's some editing work here. So the students wrote the rough draft, double space. Then they have to go back and they have to edit their own work. And then I will look at it and make my own comments on it. And then the students will write their final draft. And the final drafts, after they've done the rough draft and the editing, they are just beautiful. When you look at, for some students, an outline, I really encourage them. I want that rough draft to just be really messy with corrections. And then once the final draft comes along, every single student does beautiful work. Some, the cursive is more neater, but it doesn't matter. The writing for that child is beautiful with what they are able to do. I don't have it on here, but we also write one research paper every year on the planet that the students chose to create during our astronomy unit. I give them printouts from the NASA website and the Institute for Creation Research. They underline all the key information, and then they create an outline from that. And then from that, that outline has to be categorized in a certain way. And I have it written out, so it's one way to categorize it so that they don't just hit and miss all these different points without putting them all together with the way they need to be organized. And so they go through and do all of that as well. And finally, for sixth grade, like fourth grade and the other grades, they're learning how to, fourth grade is learning how to analyze a famous quote, and so is sixth grade. We're deciphering its meaning and how it was originally meant or used. And students write why that quote is praiseworthy, the virtues of the author on the page on the left. They write the virtues of the author. They use and they write a thesis. Students write why that quote is praiseworthy. And sorry, I lost my place here for a minute. They use that quote to write their own stories that explain the quote while persuading others to heed the wisdom of that quote. And on this final page, these are just 3 pages of an 8-page assignment. And on this final page, it's all synonym work. So there's 1, 2, 3 sentences, and there's specific words that they need to find the synonyms for, and then rewrite the sentences with those new words. And then the final thing to do is to write their final draft from all of that. Several months ago, our class analyzed the quote from Robert E. Lee: "Do your duty in all things. You cannot do more. You should never wish to do less." And so these are the 3 pages from that. The quotes are beautiful and are inspirational for the students. And obviously that one is great for 6th grade and all grades. It's great for me to do your duty in all things. One of the things they did with this assignment was we looked at the life of Paul, and they wrote about how he did his duty in all things. And that was really enjoyable to add our Bible time in. So that is my very quick snapshot of a year's worth of 3rd through 6th grade. And this is a tiny portion of a year's worth I need to add. So, thank you.
All right, I'm just gonna go for it, everybody.
You do that.
Go for it. Get the gelato. In preparation for tonight's talk, a pertinent question came to my mind, and that is, what is the goal of writing instruction? What is our purpose? What are we trying to accomplish? And my first thought was that we are trying to teach the kids to clearly express themselves. So articulation is our goal. And I immediately had 2 problems with that answer. My first problem with that answer is that if clear expression is all that we're going for, then the years and years of toilsome instruction and work on behalf of the student, those are all for nothing, because we have these guys. I mean, am I right? They're like hundreds or maybe thousands of emojis that we can choose from to clearly express ourselves, which kind of makes writing instruction have no purpose. This is my go-to, by the way. It's like I find that it applies to pretty much every situation. Especially when I've done something stupid and I want the other person to forgive me. And it's like, oh, upside down, that was stupid, but like smiley face, I'm kind of cute about it when I do it. So my other problem with articulation being our highest goal was that how many mass murderers have very clearly expressed their evil intentions, evil dictators. Just the other day, I read Timothy McVeigh's manifesto for the first time. You'll have to forgive me for that, but I am young. So I read that, and I was surprised that it was actually well put together, and he pretty clearly expressed his reasons for why he did what he did. Since read Mein Kampf, and probably the same thing. I haven't read that yet, but that's probably clearly expressed, clearly articulated. And so if we're gonna go with the mass murderer end of the spectrum, I also have to say that articulation can't be our highest goal. It's just not good enough. Our slogan here at Geneva is that we are growing tomorrow's leaders. And I don't know about you, but to me, leaders is just a little bit too hegemonically oppressive. And so I thought I would translate it into something more Gen Z friendly. And so our slogan is growing tomorrow's influencers. And I say that tongue in cheek, but I really do mean it. The influencing part is something that we need to think about. It's not just the training of articulation that is going to be growing tomorrow's influencers, but rather it's the distinctively moral and Christian education at Geneva that's going to prepare them, to uniquely prepare them to influence culture for good, not for evil, for truth, not for distortion, for beauty, and not for the destructive dissonance that we see all around us. In 7th and 8th grade, we build upon the moral education these kids have had since kindergarten. So all of those credos, Bible stories, scripture songs, fables, fairy tales, stories of good versus evil, have been shaping and properly ordering the affections of each child to uniquely prepare them to lead culture. And I ask you, if not our children, then who? 20, 30 years from now, who will be left to light the way in this culture of death and darkness and confusion? Yes, it's true, we are a runaway train that's speeding toward a post-Christian state, but once the last vestiges of Christianity, like mercy and charity and forgiveness, kindness, justice, and liberty, once these have completely disappeared from public life, no one, not even avowed atheists, will want to live in that dark place. And who will be there to light the way and to lead the way? Our children. And since writing is thought externalized, and in a more permanent way than speech, I believe that writing is one of the most effective ways of fine-tuning the thought life of students. In other words, I believe that writing is formative. And this fine-tuning of the thought life of students is what happens in 7th and 8th grade here at Geneva. We build upon the moral and the grammatical foundation that was laid in the grammar school, and we give the students the tools to transmit the true, good, and beautiful culture of the church to a world that, as always, desperately needs it. I mentioned earlier that in 5th grade, the students are given a big idea, they're given a theme, like virtue, and then they are to find that in the text and to be able to write about that. In 7th grade, it's a big step up because the students are reading incredibly difficult literature. So they read ancient literature in 7th grade, like Herodotus and Homer. And in 8th grade, they're reading medieval literature like Beowulf and Dante, and they are to find those big ideas themselves. They are to be looking in the text to find those themes. They're not given those themes by the teacher. And so they're looking for these symbols, ideas, and patterns. I've heard that a couple times from Mr. Ritchie. And then they are to use their notes to write long essays, let's call them long essays, about them and pulling evidence from the text. And so here's just a brief example of that. Students read the Iliad, and so the student has, the Iliad is an epic display of honor, glory, fame, cowardice, betrayal, and self-ambition. And then he's gonna go on to summarize the part of the book that he's gonna be talking about. And then he's going to support these themes with evidence from the text. So it's an incredibly difficult skill. They're by no means masters of this in 7th grade, but they get pretty good at it. In their composition class with me, we developed the skills of argumentation. And so first we learned the heads of development, and these are ways of supporting or developing an argument. So here is one student example. In Africa, there is a symbiotic relationship between the rhino and the oxpecker. The oxpecker's job is to peck off all the ticks on the rhino. They can kill the rhino and then eat them. This relationship keeps the rhino from dying and provides the oxpecker with food. In the same way, patriots must take care of their country and protect it from parasitic ideas like the ways people are changing our Constitution or groups that create division between Americans of different races. We patriots need to get rid of all the little ticks that are killing our country. By doing this, we will help ourselves to thrive. So this clearly an analogy, okay? So analogies are a way that you can develop an argument. This was a very memorable one. It was done by a 12-year-old last year. She came up with this all by herself. I was very proud of her. And this was for the VFW. Every year they have a patriotism essay contest. And of course, our students just knock it out of the park. And so I thought this was great. I'll probably remember this for the rest of my life. Analogies are not only effective means of supporting your argument, but they also, so I would just say, giving the students the opportunity to think about analogies allows them to make connections between all realms of creation. And so we see that this very abstract idea of patriotism is being connected to this thing that happens in nature. And the student is showing the connection between that, and it shows that they are recognizing that all parts of creation are evidence to the same truths. My grandmother, who recently passed away, was a woman who loved her country because she would volunteer at a school and help unburden the teachers of work, like cutting something out, grading work, and helping with the pickup line when the children went home. She showed that being a person who loves her country just simply means loving others. And Leah might know who wrote this. But this is an example. So the student's thesis was that loving your country means loving others. And so he used an example from his life to support that. Calvin Coolidge once stated, "Our government rests upon religion. It is from this source that we derive our reverence for truth and justice, equality and liberality, and for the rights of mankind." So this student's thesis was basically that patriotism rests upon religion. That is how we show that we love our country. And so he used a testimony. He quoted a credible source. And if you've ever written a research paper, you know how important this is. We then move on to the heads of purpose. And these are different types of arguments. You're looking at an issue from multiple angles. And so students do this first in the context of stories. And I'll talk more about this in a few minutes of why we do this with stories. But students, what they have to do is they read a story and then they first refute it. So they come up with all these different arguments against things that happen in the story. And then they immediately turn around and they confirm it. So they have to defend against their own attacks. And this was our favorite story that we did together this year in 7th grade. And as you can see, we've got the evil guy with the sword and the cool guy with the crossbow, and then the kid with the apple on his head. So anybody know what story this is?
William Tell.
Yes, this is the legend of William Tell. And so students, what they had to do is they had to come up with different types of arguments. So I'll give you some examples. And the handwriting may or may not be legible, but I will help you with that. You teach 12-year-old boys, so. Why would the people bow down to his cap, meaning Gessler, the evil tyrant? He put his cap on the pole and commanded the people to bow down to it. Why didn't they just take the cap off the pole? A person would never just bow down to a cap on a pole. The student in the other part of the paragraph said, why would a tyrant make people bow down to his cap? Why wouldn't he make himself a cool gold statue or something? Like, why a cap? Okay, so this argument right here is called an unclarity argument. It's basically saying that something did not make any sense. It was illogical. It was unclear why this would have happened this way. And so we're going to hear some responses to this. How hard is it to understand these things? People with pride tend to think of themselves as higher and smarter than other people. And the student continues basically that the tyrant in his pride was basically telling the people that even his cap was better than them and that they need to bow down to him. So that is arguing that it actually is logical. Here's another argument in defense of it. Rulers want their people to be loyal to them, so he was probably testing them to see if they were loyal, which kind of makes sense. So we have students attacking it and then immediately turning around and defending it. Here's another attack. Why would Gessler make the punishment for William be shooting if that is what Tell is good at? Gessler would never make William do what he is best at. And so this would never part, this is called an impossibility argument. It would not happen this way, that an evil tyrant would punish this rebel by making him do the thing that he's known all around the country for. It's like if you were gonna punish LeBron James by making him do a layup. Like, this would not happen. So it'll be interesting to see the response. It is smart for a tyrant to punish a rebel with what he is best at for more humiliation. Thus, Gessler wanted Tell to fail in his best skill to be made lowly. And so we have a pretty reasonable defense that it actually is possible that a tyrant would do that. Let's pretend Gessler did make the decree. Who would ever think about shooting toward his own kid? A good parent would never shoot at his child. The parent loved his child, and why would he shoot an arrow toward his child? And so I highlighted good parent because this kind of argument is an inconsistency argument, saying that a person is not acting in accordance with the kind of character that he was supposed to be. So Tell is supposed to be a good father. Why is he shooting a deadly weapon toward his child? Tell accepted the challenge because maybe he could protect his son from death. Fathers love their sons, thus Tell wants to save his son. So I highlighted fathers there because it's showing that he was acting consistently with the category of person that he was. Basically, Tell trusted his son's life in his own hands more than he did in the tyrant's hands. Why would the people shout for joy? If a child almost dies, it is not joyful. So this is an impropriety argument saying that it was morally wrong of those people, those bystanders, to cheer and shout when this child almost died. It should have been a more sober reaction to that. It was wrong of them to do this. Yeah, the people cheered. So what? It is hard to contain yourself when you are struck, boom, with emotion. So obviously the people would be overcome with emotion and cheer. And if I could just translate the student's argument into like more mature words, that the people's affections were properly ordered. Because they valued the joy of a life being saved more than they did the sadness of a life almost being lost. All the things that are underlined, we're working on figures of speech and figures of description. And so boom was an onomatopoeia, and you'll see some more things being underlined here. Why would Tell reveal his plan to kill Gessler? A man in the presence of a maniacal tyrant should be more careful. This is an inexpediency argument saying that it did not work out well for him to threaten Gessler. So basically, after Tell shoots the arrow, then an arrow drops out of his coat, and he's like, oh yeah, by the way, evil tyrant, that was for you if I would have missed my son. And so this argument is that's inexpedient of him to do that. It's not beneficial for his cause. And here's a response. Tell revealed his plan to Gessler in order to guide and inspire the people to rebel against the tyrant. So actually it was expedient for him to do that because his brashness was able to inspire the people around him to rebel against this evil dude. And so these are the heads of purpose that we learn. And the students practice them in the context of folk stories like the legend of William Tell. and they, I wouldn't say master them, but they get pretty comfortable with them. And then the idea is that they would take these skills and they would apply them to their reading that they're doing in their literature class. And so here's an example from the Iliad. Why would Achilles sell Hector's body to Hector's father Priam? So Achilles and Hector are enemies. Achilles ends up killing Hector, and then he ends up giving the selling the body back to Hector's father. In every aspect of Achilles' character, he would have let Hector's body be blown away by the wind. Achilles is a savage brute. Why would he then act differently than what his hard-set face would do? And so this is an inconsistency argument, saying that Achilles wasn't acting according to his nature. He wasn't acting the way that he would have acted there. And the next paragraph, Achilles wanted to slaughter the Trojans. Why then would he pull out and let his own countrymen die? If Achilles flip-flopped any more, then I would think he was a piece of paper being moved to and fro by the swirling winds. And so this here could be an inexpediency argument. So if his avowed end was the slaughter of the Trojans, then why would he do something that didn't work toward that end? It could also be an impropriety argument, a moral argument, saying it was wrong of him to do this because it resulted in the death of many of his countrymen. The things that are underlined here, you can see two of them have to do with wind, and that is called Anemographia, which is a specific figure of description we're working on. Slaughters underlined, that's an example of amplification. So it's taking your words and choosing synonyms for them that just have like stronger connotation. And so instead of saying kill, slaughter just is a lot more vivid. And 7th and 8th grade, safe space. Calm down, breathe deeply. I don't mean it's a safe space in that your children will not get made fun of, because chances are if your child in the 7th or 8th grade, I probably made fun of them just today. So that's not what I mean. But what I do mean is that in our writing program, it's a safe space in that we're not asking 12-year-olds to delve into deep mysteries like, why does God allow evil? Double predestination. Was it right that we dropped an atomic bomb on Japan? We're not asking them to do that. We're starting off with folk stories. And the students are developing these skills in a low pressure, fun context. And when they get older, more mature, they know some more stuff, then they're going to be equipped to handle these bigger issues, but we don't do that at first. Because this. And so I will hand it off to Isaac.
All right, thank you all for coming. Thank you all for staying. Who's this guy? Anybody know who this is? All of you know who this is? I'm guessing. Anybody want to say it out loud? Yeah, look at that.
Whoa.
Look at that. Hey, that's PureFlix. Okay, that's Christian. That's
allowed?
That is what? Hercules, Jewish Hercules. Is this the Samson we all know? Like this is the guy ripping apart a line and pushing down the pillars and like, I don't know, a 12-pack there or something. I mean, the reason I bring this up is because when you look at the scriptures, you get this constant theme of, hey, where does this guy's strength come from? Where's all this strength? Like you would think if he was, on the P90X program, they'd be like, oh, it's right there. You know where he's strong. The guy's working out. But in all of this, it's actually the Spirit of the Lord coming upon him. The Spirit of the Lord rushing upon him. I say this as an illustration to show you that whether you realize it or not, everything that you learned when you were little especially, the stories that you've heard, they form you. They shape your ideas, some accurately, some not so much. And this hits back on what Mrs. Warren was saying, and that is that first and foremost, writing is formative. It shapes our first impressions of the world. It lays the mind through which we interpret everything we see and everything that we do. And we watch these stories and we hear these stories, and I'm guessing most of you, like the little ones, ask the question, which one am I? I mean, show of hands, how many of you took the Facebook quiz? You don't need to be embarrassed, okay? Or maybe this one. I say this because, here we are in the 21st century, and we still have a yearning to be a part of the stories of our culture. We have a yearning to be involved and be identified in the things that are drawing on our humanity. And it's true with your children as well. Whether you realize it or not, they wear it on their sleeves. They love stories. They love good stories. They love painful stories. They love powerful stories, stories of redemption, and stories of conquering the impossible. Stories of hope in what sometimes feels like a hopeless world. The fable, the narrative, the Greeks and the Romans, the Carolingians, the Italians, basically everyone who spoke Latin, the French, Spanish, the English, everyone pretty much all the way up until like 150 years ago recognized that stories, and especially fables and narratives, wise sayings and proverbs, were the essential way in which you form a child. That which they know of themselves, that which they know of the world, is how they will see and interpret the rest of the world. And so you get a very real sense that writing is not just something that we learn in order to communicate, but writing in essence forms you. It is the means through which you interpret everything, and therein lies the power and the danger. So in the upper grades, we work through what are called the progymnostica. There are 14 exercises that, as Dr. Kester was saying, originally started with the ancients. In the first years of the child's life, they get to play in the fable stage, which is wonderful. That's where they should be, acting out fables. That's essential to writing. It's yes, the techniques are important, but it's imbibing the stories. As the kids move on to the older grades, as Mrs. Warren was talking about, they like to stretch, they like to move, they like to take ideas, push them to their limits, see where they break, see where they bend, and apply reasoning and logic. Because by golly, if any of you have middle school age children, how many times they say, yeah, but why? How come? Who says? It's ingrained in them to want to not only understand who they are, but see the limits of what they can become. One of the most natural things, they want to understand the world through testing limits. And as I said, in writing, we give them the playground in this middle section of the progymnostica, where they get to prove or show something's false or something's true, or talk about tyrants in a general sense, or praise someone, or condemn someone, or compare. It's the process of growing from formative in their character to informative. The process of being able to take the stories in the presence of who they are, and then to allow those to move around inside of them, try them on, and bring them out for others to examine. And that's from. Now, I should warn you, I have one wall of text in my slide, and from experience, I know how terrifying that is, especially since it's quite late. So I put these caution signs for everybody. Just bear with me. The encomium. The encomium. I want to just look at this for 1 second. When we teach the kids, they're especially in the upper grades, they have the capacity to learn so much. They have the capacity to learn an enormous amount. The encomium is, it's a discourse that expounds the good things for anyone who can read the first line. What is this saying? The first step in all writing is laying a foundation by which the students know the objective of what they're doing. Secondarily, they need to know the scope. What is the rhetorical play that they're going to be playing with, right? What is the stuff that will be available for them to mess around and design the things that they're going to create? And then the teacher, as in the earlier grades, gets to exemplify the form. And the beauty of the form is that the ancients understood what God had written into the world, namely that logical, chronological, rational things have a capacity to not only shape our thinking, but shape the affections of our hearts. Once our minds become orderly and our hearts become orderly, we see the world through the lens of Christ. We see things in their proper context. And so even the pagans recognize that there is a simplicity and a dignity to following a form that begins with your heritage and birth. Where do you come from? Where did you study? What did you make of yourself? Who are you like? What will stand of you when you are gone? In all the writing structures, these components, these things, they aren't just there to copy and get a grade, but through enough exposure, they really do start to shape the way the kids think. They begin where beginnings are, and they end where endings should be. You might be wondering why, if not for the intrinsic value of these things. By a show of hands, how many of you have had to go to a wedding and write a speech? Yeah? How many of you had to go to a funeral and was asked to say something? How many of you have been on Facebook and someone posted something absurd and I wish I knew how to explain exactly why that's inconsistent, but all I'm going to put is a sad smiley face. We all yearn for the capacity and the tools to do the things that are common to our humanity. And at Geneva, we give those skills to your children. We try to cause them to drink from the well in such a capacity that it becomes normative. It's not always an outline. It's a way of living. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of being. As they continue to grow, and this was my thanks for you. I had to look this up. So TLDR means too long didn't read. It's extremely common. Verily, your Vicky Sois, which I looked up, is a French. Vicky Sois. See, pronunciation. I learned through reading. Right? It's a French soup.
It's a
Cold potato soup. Okay, you know more than I do.
Yeah,
A verbiage here
like so we know the dish.
Always learning. In the upper grades, we're talking the 10th and the 11th graders. They get to the capacity of impersonation and description. And you might be scratching your head like, so you learn how to rip someone apart, and then you got to, all right, I'm going to write like I'm Oliver Cromwell today, or Julius Caesar, or I'm going to describe the Pantheon. Like, why in the world are those there? I'll tell you why. What the pagans didn't know, but had a sense, the scriptures laid out and clear, that the ultimate aim and end of man is the imitation of God. And that impersonation is, in essence, trying to understand the depths of the creatures that God has created. And likewise, description is trying to understand the depths of the world that He's created. And I have to say, especially with the 10th grade class, they love it. They love creating and being creative and taking on other people's hats and boots and wearing them. They absolutely enjoy it, and they're quite good at it. I had a section which I was going to do a brief aside. I think I'll share it with you another time, but I'll make it brief. By the way, this is Frankenstein was written as a scary story contest between Percy Shelley, Lord Byron, and Mary Shelley, who basically went for their summer vacation in a cabin that's more like a mansion, and then all had a contest on who could write the scariest stories. And Frankenstein was born. And as the context, a couple years ago, one of the most enjoyable things I got to do at the school was we had a writing guild. And it was a group of probably 30 students outside the context of school and during lunch where we'd all get together and we had created superheroes and we had created superpowers and narratives and backstories and a culture in which all of them were writing their own ideas and their own visions into this collective form. And the essence of it was that we are the good guys. And we are going to defeat the wickedness. And there was something so basic and wonderful about kids loving good and hating evil. Once they reach the upper tiers, they grow from formative to informative, and from informative to transformative. The skills and the capacities that have been growing with them from the time they picked up a pencil to the time they talked about William Tell, to the time where they sit down and join the company of the greats and engage in the great conversation. They take all that's been given to them, their skills, their capacities, and they drive them through to a single end, to show the world Christ. The thesis, a logical investigation into the true, the good, and the beautiful. We strive to see your children equipped with the understanding, the skill, and the wisdom to transform the world for Christ by cultivating truth, goodness, and beauty in all that they produce. And I'll give you one example. This was from one of our seniors' thesis. Fathers and mothers, this is your work, and you can only do it. It rests with you, parents of young children, to be the saviors of society unto 1,000 generations. Nothing else matters. The avocations about which people weary themselves are as foolish child's play compared with this one serious business of bringing up our children in advance of ourselves. And her own thoughts. Most important is the ability of art, both the production of and the admiration of its beauty, to always point children to the beauty of Christ and his sacrifice on the cross. As Mason encouraged, every time you are admiring art with your children, you should always say, that is our Father. Our God provides that beauty. At Geneva, we strive to raise up your children in a manner that gives them the understanding, the skill, and the wisdom to be winsome communicators in thought, word, and deed. But more than that, to share in the eternal story of a God who loved his children and gave his life that we may live. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you all for staying. I know it was quite long, but really, I thank you, the parents, for your children and for your commitment. As teachers, it means more than you can imagine. So, thank you all, and have an excellent night.
Oh, I did.
You know, we don't here.